Are you ready to perform at your highest potential? Thank you for joining this GP Strategies webinar, where we'll explore best practices and innovative insights to help you and your organization improve performance.
Again, I just want to thank you all for joining us for today's session, and I'm really excited to introduce you to our presenters today. Our first presenter is Dr. Cheryl Jackson. She is the Organizational Design and Change Practice Lead at GP Strategies. She is an industrial organizational psychologist with 15 years of experience designing and implementing talent management solutions across a variety of industries, specializing in job design, assessment, and engagement. And our second presenter today is Annie McManus. She leads the employee engagement practice and works as a consultant and project manager. She strives to understand the listening goals of clients so that they can better understand employees' needs and perspectives on culture. She is also consults with potential clients to provide strategic solutions that align with the needs of our partners. And in addition to managing the survey implementation, she also certifies engagement champions and collaborates with the clients on post-survey strategies. So we have a wonderful discussion planned today. And with that, ladies, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kim. We appreciate it. All right, so today, Cheryl and I will be taking a deeper dive into engagement and change by exploring some factors that you really should be attentive to when preparing for change initiatives at your organization. As we know, change is the only inevitable. We can have big change. If we think back to the pandemic, we will be talking about the pandemic a bit today. That was a big change globally, everyone going through something at the same time. We could also have small changes. Is that a small ripple effect within the organization, a new technology that we're integrating? So just think in terms of those aspects. You can have big change, small change, everything in between. But we will be talking through the fundamentals of these concepts, and then we'll explore some key drivers that impact employee engagement when driving change adoption. So these things could be the relationship with one's manager, the importance of trust and individuality, and also how agile your organization and your employees are when it comes to change. And we'll wrap up today's session by talking about some tactile actions that should be developed within your organizations to ensure you can be as resilient as possible when either that big change or little change is coming your way, and really emerge through those change efforts successfully. So let's begin by talking about some of our foundational components. So we'll start with talking about the organizational benefits of employee engagement. Now, there has been significant research conducted on the benefits of engaged employees. We know that engaged employees, are more productive. They're working on the right things, clear how their work connects to the overall organization strategy, and really feel a stronger commitment to the organization as a whole. We also see that engaged employees display organizational citizenship behaviors, such as altruism, courtesy, and conscientiousness. So essentially, they're keeping an eye out for not only their own work, their own lane, if you will, but how are their teams doing? Do we need coverage when someone needs to step out unexpectedly for a sick kid or a sick person? How do we set each other and our team up for success and really have that quality partnership across the area? Additionally, they're less likely to leave the company. We, of course, know the impact of losing top talent, the cost of replacing that employee, the time it takes to train a new employee to get fully up to speed to really effectively contribute in their role. So time and cost, it's our limiters here. So when we are looking at the research here at GP Strategies, as well as out in the industry, we do see some interesting nuance as we think about these components. So employees are more likely to leave due to career or growth opportunities, or I should say lack thereof. Additionally, we know that people will leave bad managers, so that relationship with the manager is very important. Now, these can be especially difficult to provide, especially during organizational change. And thinking back to the pandemic, when our whole world was thrown into a state of global disruption, I think a minor, good way to sum that up. We know that organizations moved, from this state of growth, innovation, expansion, and really had to pause efforts to simply survive. So we had tough decisions being made, rifts, layoffs, colleagues leaving left and right. It was really a scary time for just us as human beings, seeing the work change, the isolation that we were then having from our friends, family, policy changes left and right. And some of us did lose friends and family during that. I mean, there was real life implications. So especially during times of change, we do need to lean into what our employees need. Keep a focus on the employee experience and what's important to them. Now, one thing we found that was interesting during the pandemic, we did expect to see lower levels of engagement due to that disruption. But it was interesting that we saw our client data showed increased engagement during those times, and others in the industry found this to be true as well. So what we did find is that organizations that continue to measure and act on engagement data are currently seeing higher levels of engagement than those organizations that took their foot off the gas pedal during those times of change. We also found that organizations were most successful by leaning into communication and connection. So don't shy away from those tough messages. Those organizations that were most successful kept employees in the loop. We were providing context, rationale for those decisions being made, and really leaning into supporting their employees as much as possible. Development needs, making sure we had the right support as we're trying to work through those triage moments, if you will. Now, with that context provided, we have mentioned employee engagement a few times so far, so I would like to share with you how we define this. So you can see here on slide the X model of employee engagement. Now, I love this because it's really a simple and pragmatic framework for understanding the key elements of engagement. So we have the organization, each one of your organizations, on its path to success. We are looking to really get maximum contribution from each employee in order to deliver upon those key success metrics. And at the same time, we have each individual, each one of us coming to work every day. We're each looking for success in our own lives, personally and professionally. Personal values, goals, sometimes a strategy to get there, but we're looking for that level of maximum satisfaction. We want to find work that works for us. So these two essentially come together on the job. And we can have varying levels of contribution across the organization, varying levels of satisfaction. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we'd love to see as many folks as possible in this top apex. This is where full engagement is happening. We're able to contribute maximally to the organization's needs and strategy, and we're also getting what we need. Now, this could be different for each person. Someone may be looking for a salary that helps them meet the needs, pay the bills. Others may be looking for more development opportunities, the ability to grow, learn more. It's different for every person. So as we talk through the rest of today's session, keep in mind that idea of this individualized component of engagement. What I need might be very different from the person sitting to the left of me. So ultimately, this is a mutually beneficial relationship where both employee and organizational needs are met. Employee satisfaction does impact your ability to create and continue to maintain and sustain a high-performing environment. And really, it's paramount that when you're looking to deliver on your strategy, you are keeping in mind that employee experience because it needs to be part of how you do business on a daily basis. So I will turn back towards the concept of change, and I'll pass this back over to Cheryl.
All right, thanks, Annie. So in times of change, we often see change and talent development practitioners go to extreme lengths to prepare their workforce and the organization as a whole for that change. And that's they do things like skill development. How do we need to upskill our workforce to be able to prepare for this? Create communications. What change is happening? Why are we doing this? What's your new role in this change? Providing a level of education. How are we going to shift from doing A to B? What is each step in that process? What new technology do we need to engage in? And how do we get that information out? We often see a little bit of leader development, stakeholder alignment. What are we doing in organizational readiness? These elements are key change elements, and they often focus on that when we're looking at that X model that Annie just shared. They're focused on those organizational aspects of it. How do we keep our organization performing, contributing to the work that they're doing, contributing to the organization's success? And in times of significant crisis and change, that is the top priority. We need to keep moving along. If you are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when you're under significant stress and you're struggling to know if your basic needs are going to be met, and it can sound extreme when we talk about the pandemic, that was extreme, but even in less extreme cases, am I going to keep my job? What does this mean for me in terms of my role here at the company? you start to question, am I going to be able to pay my bills, care for my family? Am I going to enjoy the work that I'm doing is a big piece of that. But we're less focused on overall satisfaction. So it makes sense that the organization is trying to keep themselves afloat. And they're really focused on those performance side, keeping the organization moving at the pace of change and continuing to meet the requirements of the workforce. But in order to ensure maximum employee engagement, we have to think about those satisfaction factors. How are we going to keep the organization engaged during this time? Not just help them understand what their role is and why we're as a company making these changes, but what does it mean for them? How is it going to make their daily lives even better and help them enjoy the work they're doing from a satisfaction standpoint? And if you remember that X that we just drew, we need to have both, and that employee engagement is really at the apex of where they cross over and we have maximum contribution and maximum satisfaction. Okay. So let's take a look at what we're getting ready to experience. So throughout the past several years of pandemic, we've moved past that, and organizations are starting to move back into this, what normal feels like. And many organizations think, great, for 100 years we operated this way, 20 years, 10 years, we operated this way, and we're just going to fall right back into that. Or we thought, we thought that remote work was going to be great for us, but now we're thinking maybe we should bring everyone back. It's the way we've always done things. We're just going to revert back to that old way. In-person training, on-site working, getting people back into the office and on-site with clients and different things like that. But the reality is that the workforce has made a significant shift. Many people even moving across the country or to different countries because of this, this new way of working, because of this commitment that they were made by the organization that said, this is how we're going to operate now. We love it. You love it. Everyone loves it. And we don't need to be in the office for training. We don't need to be in the office on a daily basis to work. We can onboard the way that we've done it, in a new way of doing it, the way we've done it for the past 4 years. But we're starting to question that. Stakeholders are starting to question if this is working. Even employees are starting to say, maybe I don't want to work from home all the time. How can I integrate this into my new work life? And we're seeing a real butting of heads when it comes to the organization, what the organization wants and what employees want. And the organization is trying to have the best outcome for themselves and their employees. But employees are saying, I have these new expectations and I will look for an employer that will provide that. If my company won't provide that, I'm now open to looking at the external world. And we're not as locked down as we once were. People are starting to lift up their heads and say, what else is out there? During the pandemic, we saw that big shift from being employed by someone else to being self-employed, or people have started to explore other options, some people not even going back into the workforce. And so we're trying to attract some of those people back, as well as keep the employees that we have. And so even returning to the normal is not going to be an easy task. We still have plenty of change ahead of us. And as we move into potential recessions and some layoff discussions that are starting to happen, what does that look like for companies that are still maybe suffering from a dampening of that employee engagement, some of those broken contracts, and re-raising those questions the employees are having in their minds? So these are some of the examples that we've seen over the past several years. Back in the office, hybrid workforce, virtual learning really taking over the learning atmosphere and environment, and then new onboarding practices. So with our clients, one of the biggest things that we see is starting to bring employees back. So we do talk about that a lot, but there are shifts across the board. And I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Annie to talk a little bit before we dive into the next slide.
Definitely. Thank you, Cheryl. So one of the things that Cheryl mentioned was this change effort about calling employees back to the office, either strictly in office, we're all going to be here 5 days a week, or just a reduced amount of work from home days. Now, we have also seen some organizations that have hired recently for remote positions and then pivoted as soon as that employee starts into mandating in-person presence after they're hired. So just consider the impact of that type of, bait and switch, I know is not the intent of the organization, but from an employee perspective, it looks very bait and switchy. So typically when this happens and these types of changes are happening, especially at the beginning of employment, we're not considering providing all of the context. We are valuing presenteeism over the real value provided by employees for the work that they do. So I will just encourage you to avoid doing that. Starting off someone's employment that way is almost a guaranteed way to have really low engagement levels. Beyond that, your employees are no longer going to be advocates for the company. Why would I want to recommend this organization as a great place to work if my first real interaction with them felt deceitful? So we do understand the value of presenteeism, connecting in person. What I would encourage you is to do very purposeful together activities. When and how are we bringing folks together? I have heard a lot through our surveys, the work with clients that we've been doing, that this return to office, we're bringing everyone into an open space. All of a sudden, I can't even hear myself think on calls. Nevertheless, I'm joining these remote calls, sitting next to a person that's joining the exact same remote call. So if we are going to be together, let's bring each other together for very purposeful work. How can we do innovation during that time together, really advance the work that we're doing, and then also allow for heads down activities? The other thing I do want to comment on is related to onboarding. So we do see new onboarding practices on the slide here. And I will say very typically, we do see strong onboarding onboarding, it's when you're first brought on board, those first 30, 60, 90 days, very important touch points. Those can create great foundations, connections with the organization. What is interesting in the engagement data that we see when we slice and dice by tenure, we see essentially two moments typically across the employee life cycle where we do see some dips in engagement. So typically around the 13 to 18 month mark, and also around the 2 to 3 year mark. So each of those would be, I've gotten fully immersed in my role. I know what I should be focusing on. And now I'm starting to see maybe some deficits in tools that I don't have that I need to do my work, or something else that's going on. I was promised all these development opportunities, and now we're really diving in and I'm not feeling like I'm getting those anymore. So I will acknowledge we do expect to see dips, but each organization may be slightly different as to when those dips occur. One thing we could do is utilize that data that you have about your organization through that tenure lens. Where do you see those moments happening? How can we re-engage with employees? And so it's not just onboarding at the beginning, but how do we have those employee lifecycle touch point moments where once folks have really gotten into the groove, they can partner with us to make sure that this employee experience is as great as possible. We have what we need to do to be successful. Are there additional trainings we should offer or target at those moments in time? Maybe that 2 to 3 year marks where we want to start talking a bit more career development opportunities, cross-training, mentorship. What do we have that we can offer our employees to allow them more points of connection and learning? So I would encourage you to use that employee data if you do have that. So next, let's take a look at our key drivers of engagement during times of change. But first, before we do that, we'd like to do a little interactivity here and move into a poll question. So Kim has just popped that up on the screen. And essentially, our question is, how does your organization prepare leaders to lead their teams through change? Our options are change management is built into our leadership development program. Leaders are provided a separate training to support a specific change initiative. Leaders are provided talking points and FAQs to support a specific change initiative. And lastly, leaders do not receive specialized training to reinforce change with their teams. And we're seeing those responses start to come in. I am seeing some responses across all, but it seems to be a little bit more heavy on C and D, our last two options there. We'll give just a couple more seconds. I'm seeing about just over half of you have responded. So if you've not responded at this point, please do so. Every time I'm about to say it's slowing down, we can go now, share those results. I keep getting a few more in. I am seeing some comments here. A couple of these options apply depending on the complexity of the initiative. That's a great point. Big change, little change, change in between. Can definitely see some different approaches there depending on that. All right. So
and what we're seeing here with some of, especially these, the FAQ support, that's a common one that we see. Let's just give you the information that you need so you can read it off and answer any questions. And these are kind of that basic change information. How do we keep people moving? If they have a question, let's answer it. Question, answer, keep them moving, help them be productive. And while that does support satisfaction, it's really hard to be super satisfied if you don't know what you're doing and you have all these questions. It doesn't take that next step to help them understand, how do I fit into this? It's just very transactional almost. Let's keep you moving. We'll answer all these questions later. We'll figure it out later, but let's keep going. I'm not surprised to see that one high.
And Kim, I think you're good to close the results and share those for everyone to see as well. But essentially, yeah, what we are seeing is less of a trend that we're really building this into our leadership development programs, more of the on-demand information or nothing really done to support. I think when we do talk about change and we'll continue along this, Cheryl, I know we have a lot more to speak about today, but I think it is really important to keep in mind change and preparing for change is not, change can be seen as a single moment in time, but change occurs over time. And in order to really set ourselves up for success, we need to do some things year round and how we set ourselves fundamentally up with our culture to make sure we are prepared for those changes. But Cheryl, anything else that you would like to add in terms of our results here?
No, I'm ready.
All right.
It does look like we have a raised hand. Kim, do we want to take that? I don't know that we can if we're
no, yeah, but we will acknowledge it. That's what I'll do.
Okay.
Sounds
okay.
Good. Yeah, if you're unable to,
all right.
Write in the chat. Feel free to write in the Q&A your question. We can definitely attend to it that way.
All right. So what are those key drivers of engagement through change? So as we worked with our clients through prior to the pandemic, through the pandemic, and then beyond, we started noticing these trends for how some organizations, they started with high engagement, and then we saw that drop, and they were not able to maintain those high levels of employee engagement, where others maybe had a stable level and even increased. We started to ask that question, what is it that is truly driving this result for these organizations? And we came up with these three categories by diving into each of those different experiences. We have relationship with manager as being a real connective point that held employees to the organization through the manager. We always say great managers are so powerful within organizations, and this is a great example of that. And one of the drivers of that relationship was trust and individuality. When an individual felt that they were seen and heard, yes, everyone is experiencing difficult times, but I need you to know that I'm experiencing difficult times. I'm facing challenges. Not, yes, everyone, me as your employee, as your team member, I need to know that you see me and hear me, and I can trust you enough to have those open conversations with you. That really solidified that relationship. And then how prepared was the organization for change? How agile are they to be able to adjust and adapt when we had to suddenly switch over? We had clients and various clients that did not do any online recruiting. Everything was in person. Those that were able to adapt quickly and get their technology shifted, go through those policies and procedures, didn't limit them from being able to move at the speed of change. They were able to adjust, and those employees working within that environment were more productive and more satisfied. The organization was able to bounce back in the midst of all of those challenges. So let's dive deeper into each one of these and really talk about what that means for org design and org development and how we can help drive these factors within the organization.
All right. So, as we examine the key differences between those organizations that experienced a decline in engagement versus those that maintained or even increased engagement after the pandemic, we do see that employees in companies with those maintained or increased levels of engagement more likely to agree with the statement, I have a great working relationship with my manager. Now, as we dig into those more successful client stories, what we do find is that executives were delivering the company direction and some high level messaging. And managers were really supported in connecting with their teams to deliver what that meant, how it would work, what the tangible is, and what that really looks like in day to day practice. Now, in some companies, the manager employee relationship was not particularly high pre pandemic, but it increased throughout. And those managers really made real focused efforts to adapt to this new environment, working hard to maintain the culture, connection with their teams. And while this working environment was challenging for some managers, many companies did provide tools and resources to help coach and guide them through leading virtually. Now, we spoke a little bit earlier about attrition. We know that when these relationships don't have genuine connection, I, as a leader, am creating this real safe space. If we're not finding the good there, we know that employees are more likely to leave. We do very much hear employees leave bad managers. When we don't see that great working relationship, we do see some impact there. So while connection and communication come naturally to some leaders, many managers are promoted for their technical skills. They are good at what they do. Therefore, they may not have the soft skills, quote unquote, soft skills required for real successful leadership and really building those quality relationships. So it is important that organizations are ensuring that we're providing training to create the common language and expectations of our leaders and really allowing leaders to lean in. And I love a few of our clients have really done this great recently. Looking at the employee data, who are those managers that are a bit higher scoring? Let's showcase them. Have them speak to the organization. What's working well? Where have they found success? What are their challenges and how do they rise above? So I think it's really important. We often talk about bad and the impact of a bad leader, but make sure you're also understanding what's working well at the organization, how you can lean into that, capitalize on that, and share some of those best practices so we can all rise together. And Cheryl, I'll let you speak to the change connection here.
Yeah, when we look at typical change models, oftentimes we think the organization is responsible for that. And the organization, we mean HR, the change team, they create the plans, they roll them out, and the manager's like, hey, we're finding this out at the same time, or we're getting FAQs ahead of time. We're learning a little bit about it, but this is happening to me as much as it's happening to you. And while that does help bond, like us against them mentality, it doesn't do a lot to create this sense of confidence in the organization or in the manager. So that employee has someone to vent to, but they don't have someone to cling to. And so when you look at your change management models, I highly recommend that you say, how do we get our managers as involved in this model as possible, as involved in the process, get them in early, and then have them share these communications with their team. So our model here is, we got the R2P2 model of change. This is the individuality of change that says it's a very personal thing. No matter what is happening, I as an individual am having to make this change. It's affecting my daily life, how I show up, the behaviors that I engage in. So we need to make it individual to that person. And they say, hey, it's new technology. It's a company thing. Well, I'm having to rack my brain, do something different, get out of my comfort zone, have new behaviors. Why should I do all of this just to make the company more money or to make it more smooth? Yes, all of those are contribution factors. How do we bring in their satisfaction factors to have that well-rounded employee engagement? So we have, first of all, employees often feel disengaged when they're confused. They think it's too hard. I don't know what to do. I'm going to withdraw. So this model really helps bring them into the fold. So first of all, we want to provide that reason. What's in it for them? You've heard WIFM. What's in it for me? What's in it for them? Why should they care? How is this going to impact their daily life in a positive way? What is their role going to be? How are they going to change their behaviors? What are we asking of them to do? And then how are we going to upskill them and prepare them, create a path forward so that they're not confused and they're not having to pick up the phone and say, what do I do now? Feeling insecure about that, feeling incompetent. that doesn't do anything for employee engagement. I don't know if you've ever felt like you had no idea what to do and you felt completely incompetent. It's really hard to be engaged in those moments. So creating an environment where they have the skill, they know where to go, they know who to ask, and then being that partner and saying, I need someone to walk alongside me, lead by example, show me how it's done, take my hand and say, we're in this together. Let's figure it out together. And that can be a change champion, a change agent, the HR team, but it's really powerful when it is their direct manager that says, we're doing this together. I'm one step ahead of you and I can show you, step in my footprints, just follow me. Exactly. With all this ice going around, we're driving in the tracks of the person ahead of us. I'm staying right where you went, bud. We're just going to fall right in line. You feel like you have a partner in that. And that goes a very long way. So rather than have the organization provide all of these elements, it's very powerful when the manager is the one that is truly driving some of these individual factors of change.
So we're next going to take a dive into trust and individuality. So from our analysis, we do see that the 4 items we have highlighted on the screen here had a stronger correlation with engagement than other factors, and especially during times of change. Now, as you can see, 3 of these 4 factors address the manager-employee connection directly. Now, a key driver of that relationship between managers and their employees is the level of trust that employees have with their manager and feeling as if their manager sees them as individuals. Each one of us comes to work every day with a whole life experience behind us. And I really want my manager to see me as a person with unique interests, needs, talents, what I can bring to the table. So as we look across our team, each person brings a different unique perspective to the table, different education, just different life experiences. And not to get too kumbaya, but that is what makes life beautiful. Just the ability to see these different pieces come together and how we can kumbaya together, I guess. So I would encourage our managers not only to be aware of the differences across their team, different strengths, different passions, but also utilize that and act on that information to really lean into people's strengths. Now, the sense of trust can only be developed, number one, over time. Does not happen overnight. But managers really need to have these meaningful and consistent conversations with their teams, express their own vulnerability, and provide a safe space for employees to be able to express themselves. So while the manager may not be able to change what's happening, they can be this safe space for people to say, this sucks. This is a real struggle. It's going to take some time for us to learn. How do I do this? Have those moments of discomfort in a safe place and listen to the employees, acknowledge the challenge, truly understand what those needs are, and be able to move forward together within what's in your control. So I know there's managers out there that's, we just have to do it and buckle down and go, go, go. While yes, we do have to get through the change, it's happening for a reason, but that attitude alone does not go far towards building trust, their employees feeling heard, or developing a real meaningful relationship with your manager. Now, companies where we saw a high trust rating for direct managers, we also saw perceptions of senior leaders, particularly around trust, decrease. Now, what's interesting about this may be because our executives were making the tough, unpopular sometimes decisions and really taking a hit in terms of the trust with them at the top. But what this did was create an opportunity for managers and that direct relationship to build an even stronger connection. So Cheryl mentioned the us versus them mentality. This actually strengthened the bond between managers and employees. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that managers should go around speaking poorly of executives, shutting down the decisions, poo-pooing what's going on. But what managers' role in this is really translating that information, helping employees to understand the rationale, the decisions that were made. Again, providing that safe space for venting, processing, figuring out how to move together. And we know that when the managers do this well, it does show an increase in that relationship. And we do see increased engagement as a result, and some of those connections to the company, recommending this place is a great place to work, some other key metrics that are really important to organizations. Now, I will say, what if you are a leader responsible for a large team, those that are working multiple shifts? I've got 50 people. How do I have meaningful conversations with 50 people? We're on different shifts, yada, yada, this is going on. I would say there's a lot on the plates of our managers, but one of the most important roles that a manager does is making those connections, making sure your people are heard, sharing consistent messages, and creating that open space for dialogue. So I do think being able to take a step back, if you feel that you don't have the time in the day to be able to prioritize those relationships and conversations, we might need to have more of an organizational conversation as to what's really on the plate of managers. There might be some things that are more logistical, paper pushing, things that are more transactional. We should be spending less time on that and more time on the connection, relationship, and communications. So again, this does happen over time. This is not an overnight thing. It's just like any relationship. So that is going to be consistent and communication over time. I'll pass it back to Cheryl to talk about some change agility now. You're on mute, Cheryl.
Thank you.
One time.
Thank you. I'll try to be quick with change agility because this is really about the long game. Sometimes you're like, we're in the midst of change, we missed our opportunity. That doesn't necessarily have to be so, because the effort that you're putting in now is going to help build your change agility for the next one. But when we're thinking of future change, how do we prepare our organization for all of this inevitable change? We live in a VUCA world. We know that change is inevitable. How do we get on the front end of that and create policies and procedures that are going to be flexible and be able to ebb and flow? And we have these three different areas, overall organizational readiness for change, change resiliency or ability to bounce back. And this can really be developed before change and even through change. You prepare for it. And so what is a change agility? What does it consist of? First of all, we have this engaged sponsorship or a united and aligned leadership team that really understands their role as sponsors or even champions of change. They understand how to communicate information. They're skilled in delivering those messages and building support for their vision and building trust and rapport with others. They've got those skills early because they've been practicing it early. They've been practicing on a smaller scale so that when big things happen, it's not, I don't even know you. I've never seen you. And suddenly you're telling me that I have to come back into the office, or that you were having this major shutdown, or that we're having layoffs, any kind of change that you're going through. You don't want that to be the first time your employees are seeing leaders really have to step up and communicate hard things. They need to have that sense of connection, and leaders know what their role is going to be. And this is number two, is the ability to recognize and manage their own natural resistance to change. They're leading by example to say, this is a hard thing, but we're going to get through this. And I know I've got my own resistance going on, and I'm not fighting it from a leadership standpoint. I'm understanding my role in that, because everyone has this natural resistance, and leaders are no different. They've got to lead through that. And then the lack of organizational rigidity. Said another way, is a change mindset, recognizing that change is inevitable and being willing to ebb and flow with the changing demands of this volatile world that we're in. The ability to quickly adapt and learn new things is part of that mindset. And we've seen organizations that have started taking this approach to say, we are going to be more agile. We want to have a learning organization. So they're having growth mindset implementations and helping their workforce as a whole stretch and grow and realize that we're not going to be set in our ways. We've always got to stay on our toes. We've got to constantly be learning. So when big scale change happens, it's just part of every day. They just flow right into it because it's not new. It's not the first time I've had to do some of these things, not the first time I've had to see things differently. So we often talk about this planned change, but what about the unplanned change like we've experienced through the pandemic? Those companies with more change agility and readiness were more readily able to adapt to those changing needs of their workforce. Okay, so let's just dive into what now. What are these tactile recommendations that you can actually do? We talked about them a little bit throughout, but in terms of relationship with your manager, this is where we need to get our leaders upskilled. Many managers are just promoted into role. I think Annie mentioned this. They were really good individual contributors, so they moved into that next phase, and we teach them the tactical things, how to do performance management and where benefits are and all of these things, but we don't teach them how to be really good leaders, how to do those leadership aspects that is really an art, and you've got to develop that. Many organizations for that change agility starting to develop leaders early. So as they're growing in their individual contributor roles, they're starting to take on more of those leadership aspects, leading teams or cross-functional teams or mentoring so they can develop those skills, and they're more prepared for these exact moments. Communication, self-awareness, how do we communicate better? How can I be more self-aware so I can help my team as well? Knowing how to provide feedback, recognition, and then follow through. Follow through is a big one that we don't always do well as managers, following up and following through with our employees. Now, in terms of trust and individuality, there are some big elements of diversity, equity, and inclusion training. Many of us have this as a check the box aspect. We need to have this. We want to grow in this area, but we don't have this real commitment to DE&I. And these elements that you learn through diversity training is going to help you understand your employees better, understand all the unique diversity that comes with your changing workforce, with different generational needs and challenges, parents and aging parents, people are caregivers, and they have all of these different diverse needs. That's going to really help your leaders have compassion and empathy and understanding that goes a very long way in building that trust and seeing people as individuals. EQ, emotional intelligence training, is a big part of that. Some people wrap them together, but these are some different aspects. And then providing them the tools and resources to assist managers in connecting and thriving, connecting with their employees and helping them thrive. So ensuring that they have the tools to provide the right amount of information, that they're informed ahead of time. There's nothing worse being on the receiving end of a manager who doesn't have the information and you feel like they're keeping something from you, or they don't know what level of information that they can share. That's going to break trust really quickly. So empowering your managers to have the information and know what information to share. And then finally, change agility. Begin developing your leaders early. Teach them what to do, how to do. In these types of situations, how are we going to be better prepared in the future? How do they know their role in change? If they're going to take on more of that change responsibility, they've got to be prepared for it.
Yeah, and I think ideally, if you can roll out solutions cross-enterprise, that is ideal. You'll have more consistent common language, real consistent messaging and reinforcement. All these factors are very important when it comes to both engagement and change. If you cannot or don't have the resources or whatever limiters for really rolling out cross-org, using a more targeted approach, so taking your engagement survey data, using a shorter pulse to measure the components that are important right now based on the change we're about to go through, that can be very helpful because you can really utilize the data to, again, build up those folks that are doing really well. What's working well? Let's understand that more deeply. And you can also target your training towards those lower scoring folks, teams, areas of the organization where we may need to do a bit more support in terms of building some of that psychological safety and really upskilling us overall in terms of that team ability. So I think that this does bring us to the end of our literally our time today. So I will pass this back to Kim to wrap us up.
Okay, great. Thank you, Annie and Cheryl. It was a great presentation. Very informative, even for me, which, my attention span's not that long, but it was very informative. So thank you very much for your time. We do have one question. So if we could just answer that, and then we can wrap it up for today. So I appreciate if you have to drop or not, but there was a question that said that which are some of the prior preparations an organization should put into place for successful change implementation, and which are some of the challenges expected when changes occur? So if you could answer that, whoever wants to take that.
Yeah, I'll jump in there first. So when we talked about on the previous slide, maybe ask the question before we quite made it there, but really preparing your leaders to know what their role is going to be in that change and how to move into action. One of the worst things that you can do for change is have leaders that don't know their role as change champions, as agents, in sharing information and being an advocate. They often feel like, I'm with you, it's happening to me at the same time it's happening to you, and they serve as kind of that venting partner, as opposed to being a reflection of where we're going and helping instill that confidence within employees. And so getting that information out to them, teaching them what their role is in that change process is going to be huge in helping them be those not quite sponsors, but stakeholders and champions of change, advocates of change, bringing their team along. And some of the expected factors here are resistance. Change is hard, even if it's great change, even if everybody wants it, it means I'm doing something different, and that's a risk. It's something I'm not quite comfortable with. So helping employees and leaders understand this natural resistance and not fight it, but to work with it. Not think that it's a bad thing. It's an okay thing. We don't need to be scared of resistance. We just need to help employees get through that. So understanding early in change, what are those resistance points going to be? And that takes some upfront work through interviews, focus groups, conversations with employees that have insight. What are you afraid of when we talk about new technology? Oh my gosh, am I going to be able to find my benefits? Okay, let's talk about that. Am I going to know where to go? Am I going to look stupid in front of my manager? All of these things that get that early and help build a plan that addresses that resistance and helps walk them through that, not trying to kind of beat them into it. It's not going to affect you. You're not going to have any changes. It's just a new website. It's scary. Even a new website can be a little bit scary. Recognize that and plan to walk through that with them.
Thank you, Cheryl and Annie. I really appreciate you taking the time and for a great discussion. And I also want to say a big thank you to everybody who joined us today for your time and attention. At the end of the session, we do ask you to take a minute to fill out a survey because we want to make sure that we are the best at what we do in providing information to you. We hope you'll join us again for another upcoming webinar. Be sure to go back to gpstrategies.com/webinars for our upcoming sessions.
This webinar was brought to you by GP Strategies. Together, we help organizations transform through their people. You can access more webinars or download additional resources by visiting the GP Strategies Resource Library. The link is on your screen and in the description.